Okay, you all can hear me well. Hopefully, I don't need the mic. Uh, my name is Mayur. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. Uh, I want to get right into it, right? And to Neil's point on waking people up, this is a word we all see almost every day, right? Now, I don't know how many of you have noticed that this word is made up of two words. Can anyone see the two words I'm talking about? There we go. Thank you for that. ID and entity, right? And for a very long time now, we have treated identity as just that, right? An ID attached to an entity, right? And this could be a number on a card, or it could be a name in a ledger, right? And that's how we used or we thought of identity, right? But all of that is now changing, right? Because identity is moving from something you have, right? So like a card or a password, to something you are. So that could be our good thumbprint or my voice or my face, to something you do, right? So your behavior in a particular context is also very much a part of your identity today. And therefore, I think it wouldn't be wrong to say that the identity of identity itself is evolving. And what I wanted to do, therefore, today is use a simple framework to take you all through this evolution. So look at the past, present, and future, what is changing, right? From the lens of some dimensions on identity, right? So break identity down into data, right? So what data sources do we have available for identity? What solutions do we have for identity? What is the technology perspective look like? And how does the governance and trust angle look like, right? And then I'll close with some quick case studies. And as I do all of this, I obviously will be talking through the CRA lens, as Neil spoke about, given the topic of today. And I will keep things super high level because I am a strategist. I'm not a specialist. And strategists are notorious for talking 30,000 feet, and I'm guilty as charged, right? So I'll keep things super high level. So let's get right into it, right? So let's look at data first. So from a credit bureau's perspective, in the past, the data available to a credit bureau to do checks was very limited, right? So you obviously had your credit file, which had some ID information or some demographic information in it. But that was pretty much it. You probably also had some negative data that banks were submitting, but that was pretty much the data bureaus had to facilitate ID checks. And all of that data was siloed and static, right? So it was in different databases, it was not connected to each other, and it was static because the update frequency was not that high, right? It used to update very irregularly. A lot of this ID data was also country specific, right? So it was very rare to hear about a case where one of our customers, a bank, is able to press a button and get a global ID checked in real time from some other country, right? That was extremely rare. So coming to the present, right? So now you all know there's a lot of alternative data. I think the great thing is that bureaus are getting access to a lot of this alternative data, right? And that is enabling a lot of innovation and new use cases. And not only is this data coming in, it is also becoming more connected to each other and more dynamic. So if you have heard about ID graphs in this room, so for those of you who haven't seen an ID graph before, it's pretty simple. Think about a spider web, right? And you're the spider, sorry, you're at the center of the web, right? But think about every strand in the web as a connection to one of your identities, right? So you have two devices, right? One of your devices is shared by somebody in your home, so they get connected to that block as well. You have two email IDs, right? You have a location. So think about that web, right, of connecting you to all of your identities. That's what an ID graph is. And I think we are seeing a lot of that innovation today in credit bureaus, and the kind of analytics you can do on that is pretty amazing. We are also moving to a scenario where global ID checks are becoming fairly common, right? So today we do have a solution, even as TransUnion, we call it Global Connect. The bank has a single screen, they can just do a check even for a global ID in real time. So that's pretty much getting enabled. Where is this going in the future, right? So please bear with me because there's a lot of crystal ball gazing here. Nobody knows what's going to happen, right? I'm just trying to paint a personal perspective of where I think this is going. So I think there's going to be a lot of alternative data going forward as well. And a lot of the ID graphs I spoke about are going to become even more complex and real time and connected, right? I also think they're going to become more explainable, right? So for regulators in the room, there is going to be an explainability to why did a particular strand get added, right? What is the auditability or the background of that? And I also believe that I'm sure many of you have heard about SSI. So this is self-sovereign identity. I believe we are going to see more innovation around ID data, right? So SSI, in brief, is about consumers controlling their own data, right? So think about it as you could have different governments or banks issue your ID, but you control the digital wallet for it. And if somebody asks you, prove that you're 18 years old or above 18 years old, you only pull out the ID that answers that question. You don't need to reveal anything else, right? So there's a lot of bets that the future is going to be SSI and technologies like that from a data perspective. So we'll see where it goes. Let's come to solutions. From a bureau lens, a lot of the ID solutions that we used to have were point solutions, right? So an ID check here, a fraud check there, right? And that was pretty much it. A lot of these checks were also reactive. The check was happening because an application had been filed, which triggered the check, right? And we also had a lot of fraud consortiums that were fairly common in the past with bureaus, right? So this could be suspected or confirmed fraud data that was being submitted to the bureaus. The only challenge was only the big banks were, let's say, submitting the data to the consortium, right? It's not like telcos were also submitting data, fintechs were submitting data to the same consortium. So these are very useful, but limited in that aspect. Today, we very much are moving to a world where almost all credit bureaus globally have combined their solutions into platforms. And our customers as a bank, you can actually choose which of these solutions do you want, and then you can use them for your own use cases, right? The checks are also proactive. So if I am filing for a second loan into a bank with my smartphone, right? The fact that this smartphone is new, the bank has not seen this device before, will already create some checks in the background. So even before I hit the submit button, there's a proactive check. Once I hit the submit button, there are additional friction or checks that are added just to validate that it is indeed Mayur who is filing for this application, right? So that's pretty common these days. And then we also have cross-industry consortiums, which I think is fantastic, right? Because now it's not just the big banks, it is the telcos, it is the fintechs who are submitting data into that same consortium, which is making those consortiums really powerful. Where is this going in the future, right? So I think we're going to have platforms of platforms, right? So every company has all these platforms. I believe they're going to become more interoperable and talk to each other in real time, right? I also believe checks are going to become more adaptive. So in the same use case where I was filing a second loan with the same bank with my smartphone, if it is a truly adaptive check, guess what? There won't be any friction. Even if it's a new device, there won't be any friction added. Why? Because the system will be intelligent enough to realize that the angle at which this person is holding the phone is very unique to Mayur, right? So that's one of my unique biometric signatures. And that combined with 13 other pieces of information will say that even though, yes, this device is new, pretty much clear this is Mayur who's filling the application, right? So don't introduce any friction, right? So that's where I think the checks are going. And I think in the future, we are not just going to have data consortiums where different industries are contributing. I think we're going to have intelligence consortiums. So what do I mean by that? Every bank has its own unique scoring model or methodology, right? I believe in the future, they will not just contribute data, they will also contribute the intelligence from these models in a privacy compliant way where all of these inputs go into like let's say a bureau model, which keeps getting intelligent once all of these inputs come in, right? So that's what I mean by not just data, but also intelligence getting contributed. So there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. Let's move over to technology, right? So from a technology standpoint, a lot of the ID technology in the past was linked to bureau technology, right? And bureau technology used to be highly manual on-prem. I'm sure you all know in the past when there was an ID check, there was somebody sitting behind a screen and manually looking at the ID card. That was fairly common, right? And saying, oh yeah, this looks genuine, approved, right? So that was fairly common. You also had, the checks were basically rule-based, right? So if X, then Y were the kind of checks that we were seeing. And batch processing of IDs was fairly common, right? So you used to have, it was fairly common to think of a use case where a bank used to send a whole lot of IDs in a file to a bureau. The bureau would run that overnight and return the file in the next morning. Obviously, that was not a real-time check, but that was fairly common, right? So if you come to where technology is today, almost all bureaus are moving to like an advanced cloud-native technology model. Of course, regulation permitting, right? But this is an effort which a lot of CRAs are doing around the world. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is taking over the world. I don't need to talk about that, right? It's fairly common. And it is almost all checks these days are real time, as you all know, right? There is, even today, there is the odd instance, even for a mature bureau, where there will be somebody sitting behind a screen and checking some of the IDs, but that is those are only refer cases, and that percentage has reduced a lot. Where is technology going in the future, right? So remember when I spoke about SSI, right? The self-sovereign identity. That one of the ways to implement that is on a blockchain stack, right? So there's been a lot of talk, I'm sure you all have heard, saying, okay, there's a lot of blockchain going to come on ID in the future, right? And obviously bureaus will need to adapt to that if that happens. This will be decentralized, right? Because not a particular institution or a particular bank will own the data, the technology, right? This is, every user will own his or her own ID, so it's going to be a decentralized model. I believe AI/ML will get more sophisticated, but I think more importantly, it will get more explainable, right? So today we say that this ID looks fraudulent because it doesn't look like these other IDs, and that's where we are. I believe we are going into a future where we can define the grammar of fraud. So the grammar of fraud is you'll actually be able to say why was this data point actually different, not just the fact that it looks different and was flagged, right? Verification is going to be continuous. So what that means is even if there is no ID check, even if there is no application, IDs are going to be screened 24/7, let's say by an AI agent. And if anything looks suspicious, the agent catches behavior that is not kosher, there'll be a real-time alert to an authority to try to take action on it, right? So I think that's where technology is going in the future. Talking about governance and trust, the reason we trusted in an ID card in the past was because of who issued that ID card, right? Because it was issued by a government, or it was issued by a bank, and those are trusted entities, right? So the trust came from the institution which was issuing the identity. The laws governing data exchange, consent were very fragmented, right? So even in the same country, you had a separate set of laws for telco, you had a separate set of laws for credit data, right? And dispute was manual and slow. Where we are today is the trust is not just because the entity which has issued the ID card is trusted. It is because there exists technology which from 10 different sources, you can say this is indeed the address, right? 10 sources are saying it at the same time. That is what is giving the credibility or the trust in the ID card. Lot of the laws governing consent and data privacy are becoming national across sectors. Doesn't matter it's telco data or credit data, right? You're having a single law governing all of that, which I think is great because it leads to that standardization and exchange of valuable ID data, across industries and also across borders. So with GDPR, right? It's not just national, but you're seeing region level laws, which I think is fantastic. Brings a level of standardization to the industry. Disputes are going online, so it's much more convenient for consumers to dispute and consent as well, right? There are a lot of digital consent models. So where is this going in the future, right? So in the future, you will trust the ID because it comes with a cryptographic proof. You will trust it because of mathematics. You don't need anything else to trust it, right? Like the proof travels along with the ID, right? So in SSI, there is a mathematical proof that the ID is genuine and nobody has tampered with it. So I think that's going to be a very interesting future if we get to get there. I believe we are also going to see a lot of cross-border laws, right, on privacy, on consent, again, which I think is great because that will allow cross-border exchange of ID information and will allow new use cases to flourish, not just within the country, but cross-border as well. And I also believe that, we'll have automated dispute and consent. So again, artificial intelligence and machine learning, whether you call from a phone or you write an email, there are sophisticated algorithms pushing these to the appropriate workflows, and this whole thing is becoming much more faster, right, and convenient. Let me just now switch very quickly to some use cases or what I'm calling case studies that I want to talk about. And for me, the single largest innovation that bureaus did in the past, if I was to pick one, I would say it is search and match, right? Because we just spoke about the fact that data is not always clean, at least hasn't been clean in the past, right? For in many of these countries with banks, how do you then know that this Indian lady who got married and moved to a different house, changed her name, and then applied for a loan with a different ID card? How do you know when there's even no national ID in the country? How do you know it's the same person, right? Again, with the data challenges we spoke about, right? So it was super complicated, and I think bureaus did a lot of innovation on search and match, continue to do it. And for me personally, I think this stands out as one of the biggest capability case studies in terms of the role of credit bureaus in identity, right? If you look at today, what is happening from a search and match perspective, the great thing is that that capability of search and match is getting exposed as a service to the outside world, right? So this is a use case from the US, right, from TransUnion, where let's say you have a bank bringing payment data, and you have TransUnion with, let's say, credit data, right? And the bank wants to understand, are payment attributes predictive of credit behavior in the future, right? How do you marry that data in a privacy compliant manner, right? Without both sides exposing the ID or any private information. So today technology enables that, right? And one of our solutions in the US is TrueIQ, which kind of enables this as we speak, right? So I think this is only going to get more scaled in the future. So I envisage a future where multiple entities can probably come together from different industries, and bureaus can probably play the role of a trusted, neutral, regulated party that enables search and match across these different entities, right? And can reveal insights that are useful for their consumers and useful for the economy at large, right? The second case study I want to talk about is on, it's a solution case study. Every bureau has this product, right? It's called identity verification or something by that name, right? So in India, you can ping 5 databases in real time and get a response saying, yes, this address is real. This is the right address. And you can get a match score, right? So this has been a standard solution in the past for many credit bureaus. This is the ID graph I was talking about, right? So even with a small number of nodes, you can see how rich and complex and insightful this is. And the kind of analysis you can do at, with this and scoring and all is just crazy, right? And think of this at population scale, right? It's just amazing where technology is taking us. And I think in the future, you see the different flags there, right? So I spoke about cross-border exchange of ID data. I think that's where we are going, again, with regulation enabling and everything going well, at least for some industries. I think we will see a future where we can kind of exchange ID data across borders. Incidentally, talking about Malaysia, just a few days back, there was a new cross-border data sharing law that has come into effect. And guess what? It's basically saying that as long as the other country with which you are exchanging the data is also GDPR compliant or similar, has the same safeguards as we do, this is now allowed, right? So there's no list of whitelisted countries, which Malaysia used to have, that only these countries you can exchange data. No, any country is kosher as long as they meet this minimum threshold or requirement, right? And I think this is going to happen at scale. And this is powerful because this really encourages that cross-border exchange of ID, because I truly believe ID is a global subject now. It's not a national or a local subject. The last case study I want to talk about is on technology, right? And this is our nice, friendly credit report, which you all are familiar with. It was a single block of data in the past, right? A single PDF. If you wanted the last address from the credit report, guess what? You couldn't get it. You had to pull the entire credit report, right? Because it was one single block. Today, almost all credit bureaus globally have disaggregated the credit report into multiple microservices or APIs, right? So now every part of the credit report is a separate API. So if you want the last address, only the last address, you can actually ping that and get that back in real time, right? This might look like a very, very simple thing, but I think the innovation and access that this has enabled is just crazy. Finally, I think this is where an example of where the future is going with identity, right? So in TransUnion, we've taken a big bet on what we call OneTrue. And what we're trying to do is marry our fraud, risk, and marketing databases into one single platform, which we call OneTrue, which is a solutions enablement platform. And identity is going to play, obviously, a very important role here as the single unifying layer across all of these platforms, right? So this is like a platform of platforms, like I spoke about earlier. And obviously, artificial intelligence will have a key role to play in this as we move forward, right? So other bureaus are doing similar things. I think this is, we are going to see a lot of this in the future, with ID enabling a lot of interesting technology and use cases. Finally, what does this mean for everyone in this room, right? So I think to me, ID today is not a noun. It is a verb, because it moves, it changes, it adapts, right? And as identity does that, so must all of we in this room, right? All of us play an important role on ID and shaping where it goes. I think we need to reimagine our role for each of us. What are we doing in this space, and where is ID going? What should our role therefore look like in enabling that future, right? I also believe that CRAs will continue to be at the center of this innovation, because we have a very unique position as a trusted, regulated, neutral party. And I do believe that we will continue to innovate through a lot of the stuff that I spoke about today. But I'm also pretty sure that we won't be able to do it alone. I think we'll need the support of everyone in this room to come together and build an interoperable and inclusive ecosystem when we think about the identity of the future. That's it. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions later, but passing it back to Neil for now.
Great. I think that's a very quick run through. I know there's a lot in there, but I just want to think it's a good example of the role of credit reporting and where it's going to move. So thank you very much for that, Mayor. Dennis. Dennis is well known to a number of you, been in the industry probably as long as I have, I think. Yeah. So Dennis can explain a little bit more about advanced AI and the role he's playing there as CEO and what they're doing, and give a perspective, hopefully, I think probably more on where fraud's coming from and what's happening. But
yeah, a little bit different that one, but
okay, good. Well, I'm pleased about that too.
coincidence.
There you go.
Thanks, Neil. Good, I was going to poke my eyes out. Yeah, so my name's Dennis, and I've been in the industry for over 35 years, predominantly in the credit bureau side of things, and more recently I've taken over Advanced AI. So just a little bit about who Advanced AI are. We also own and operate credit bureaus. We've got one in Indonesia and one in the Philippines. But we do other things. So we run eco-OC business across, at this stage, I think about 22 countries that we're in right now. We can do eco-OC on virtually any country in the world using AI, and I'll cover a little bit of that AI later on. We have another business in Indonesia, which is alternative scoring models. We have KYB, operates in the region as well, and a few other things. But so the attack I'm going to have on this subject today is a little bit more practical in terms of what happens now, what we can do now, and the threats that we face, and the things that are common language. You know, when I started in this industry a long time ago, we used green screen, dot matrix printers. A fax was latest technologies, right? Yeah, we had cards. That's right. But the reason I raise that, because identity was really gathered by people walking in, handing you over their IDs and so on. That's the only way we did it. Of course, the world has changed. So now we have a range of shifting landscapes for identity risk. You know, how do we know the person as a bureau that you're working with? How do we know that if you're doing a direct-to-consumer business, that the consumers that are signing up are that consumer? If you're getting consent, that the consent is coming from the consumer that should be giving it to you, and other things. So a long time ago, we started out on the eco-OC journey, and we looked at a couple of things. The eco-OC journey was principally OCR, it was liveness detection, facial recognition, right? And those were the three things. And then there were elements added to it which pulled data from the bureau, like address information and date of birth and so on, to get the different parts of what eco-OC is. But then we started having attacks. I'm sure most of you may be familiar with some of these. So 2D attacks. So they would print off things and record videos. And in the early stages, they were actually effective. So eco-OC early stage could not detect that. So we innovated. Oh, let's go back. Don't know what's happening there. The videos are not playing for the second and third one. But the next stage was 3D attacks. So they would develop things like paper masks or printing off masks to create 3D images, which would fool the technology that we had in those days. They still had the videos and the other things, but 3D attacks were prevalent. But of course, now we have deep fakes. I think everyone's very familiar with what a deep fake is. And the challenge with deep fakes is that anybody can do it. It used to be the purview of the tech geeks amongst us on how to do deep fakes. My 18-year-old son can now create an identity and a face on virtually anything because it's so easy. And the other thing is, it's gotten cheaper. Creating these fake identities through deep fakes is cheap and fast and easy. So the world of who's doing this is expanding. It's no longer the high-end criminal gangsters that have got high-end technology solutions that are doing this. Anybody on their home computer can now build out a deep fake, which is really, really scary. And so we have to continue to innovate. We have to be different. I think some of the things that Maya mentioned earlier around the future is actually already here. So you talked about ID, and we talked about looking at ID in multiple ways through AI to determine what's fake and what's real, and then being able to tell specifically what it is that triggered that to the consumer or to the applicant or to the bank or whoever it is you want to tell. And so that exists today. We can look at IDs using large language models and AI, using known real and fakes to create what is now very, very simple ways to confirm an ID is real or not. So, and it's all real-time, online, immediate response. So we can look at that ID card and say, yep, that's fake because this letter is slightly different size than it should be. Or this element in the right-hand corner has got a smudge on it that is so minute you can't see it with human eye. But AI can figure out that's not quite right. I mean, there's thousands of things it can do. I'm not going to go through them all. You know, interesting exercise I did in Indonesia a few weeks ago was throw up on the board here some Indonesian IDs. I threw up 12, I think 6 of each, 6 fake, 6 real. And I asked the audience to choose which is the fake and which is the real. The response was 50-50. So 50% chose, so the left-hand side were fake, and 50% chose the right-hand side were fake. In other words, they were just guessing, right? Because you could not tell by looking at it. So getting an ID these days, looking at it on the screen, or physically even picking it up, is not going to help you. IDs can be faked so well these days that you do need to start investing in AI technologies to really identify those fakes. Step 2 there, super resolution. Again, they've moved on from creating these low resolution images to super high resolution lifelike images. And so we are looking at the detail of that resolution. We're looking at how that resolution came to be using AI. We're looking at, does it actually represent what a photo or an image or a video should look like, given a whole lot of scenarios. The injection attacks, this is one of the later ones. Who's familiar with the term injection attacks? No? That's where they can actually take over your camera or your video on your phone. So you've downloaded an app, you're doing something, or they're trying to get in, they're trying to do your eKYC on your system, and they can actually inject I wouldn't say a bug, but something into your system that takes over your camera, that takes over your video. And so they can show you whatever they want to show you. And your system will believe it's real. So injection attacks are becoming more prevalent as well. So more things to be scared about. Fortunately, we have a solution for that. And what's the last one say? Face swap and attack. Yeah, so I think this is pretty well known to most now. I mean, there's apps you can get on TikTok or whatever it is to, swap faces with famous people. It's so easy to do. So you can easily put someone else's face onto the body of someone else. You can increase the resolution. You can have the ID. You can take over the camera. These are all real-time, real-life stories that are happening today. And so AI is becoming absolutely critical to identifying that. Now, it's a bit of a game, really, because the more that we build solutions to identify fakes, guess what the crims are doing? They're building solutions that are better to avoid our AI system. So they're using AI to beat our AI. So we build AI to beat their AI, right? It's the nuclear arms race all over again, but with AI. So where does it end? No idea. I've heard stories already about some organizations reverting back to old school, physically getting people to come into brick and mortar again. They're so worried about how do we detect fraud. Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. I think that's probably a step too far. So this talks about some of the things that we do It doesn't cover everything. If we went through everything, we'd be here all day. So some of the technologies that we use to help where we're at right now in terms of the fakes that are out there. So I think I mentioned as well the device. Talked about how someone holds the phone. We already have that. It used to be in the old days, you get someone take a photo, move left, move right, and that sort of stuff, how they use the phone. Now it's moving the phone. Do they hold the phone steady? Is it too steady? There's a whole range of things that go into that. The device integrity, the image depth, I mentioned that as well. So there are a number of things that we use at the device level to identify frauds. And that continually evolves. And I can tell you it's more than those ones up there, but that's some sort of good indication as to what we do. Then there's behavior analysis. Device motion sensor. So again, what's happening with that device? Okay. Face risk signals, location risk signals, all of these things we're getting from the behaviors that we're picking up at the time they're doing the eKYC. Right? So is that device in the right location for what they're trying to do, for what we know about that person, for what they're applying for, a whole range of things, right? And finally, liveness. Yep, we don't do 2D face mapping anymore. It's 3D. We get the full, complete circumference of a face. We can identify the smallest error in that face. We can say whether that's not quite right. Now, it may not be that that is a fraud. It could be there's something changed about their face. We'll let you know, though, that there is that risk, right? And so, hey, hang on, guys. This guy's lost his left ear. It's different to how it was. Well, he had an accident, right? So we look at 3D face mapping, additional face post detection, static face image analyzing. There's a whole series of things that go into making sure that we're able to create the certainty that that is a real live face and not a video, not a attack where they've taken over the camera, whole range of things. And the whole driver behind all of this is AI. We integrate large language models and AI into everything that we do. Right? It's becoming absolutely prevalent in our business, whether it's identity, whether it's scoring, whether it's in any part of our credit bureaus. It's becoming more and more fundamental. The challenge with using this in the credit bureau environment can be the regulators, because they don't understand some of it. Now, some regulators are great, and in my years I worked with most of them, and they're willing to learn, adopt, adapt, and trust. Right? But some want to know everything. And so the black box of AI, as it is, I'm sure most of you are not into understanding the details of AI, doesn't pass muster for some regulators because they want to know every detail. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And so that's a challenge that we have to overcome, Neil, with regulators as well, is getting them to accept the technologies and the advancement and the speed. I assume most of you know that AI doubles in advancement nearly every 3 months. That's how quickly it's evolving. So you've really got to keep up to speed with it. Building trust. Yeah, I think these are just some stuff. I'm sure you know all these already, but I mentioned trust just a second ago. And I think we have to get back to a stage where we can trust what we see, we can trust what we get, we can trust each other, and we can trust the regulators, and the regulators can trust us. And we can only do that with certainty, levels of certainty, right? That we can prove that what we're doing is working. Is it foolproof? No. Will there be some false positive, false negatives? Will some things get through? Of course. But the risk is mitigated substantially. Right? And so the losses are reduced substantially. And as we all know, for our customers, a loss is off the bottom line. Anything you can do to mitigate that, to reduce that, gives them profit back. Right? And that's our job. Our job is to look after our customers and our consumers. And that's why trust for me is paramount going forward. Of course, everything is real time. Embrace ecosystem partnerships. We do that. So we don't have all the answers. There are plenty of very smart people out there and very smart organizations, and I've seen some of them today that look like they'll be great partners for us in trying to go to the next level. And so we're continually on the lookout for how to improve. And if we can't do it, I'm not ashamed to say we can't do it. I want to partner with you because you can. AI for defense, yeah, I think I've covered that already. Expand data coverage responsibly. I think that's one thing I haven't heard a lot of today, is the responsibility we have when it comes to data coverage. Now, I know there are some fintechs, for example, that are almost lenders of last resort, right? The consumer goes there, they haven't been able to get a bank loan, they haven't been able to get a normal lending credit, and so they go to a lender of last resort, a fintech, whatever it is. And they say, yep, that's fine, I'll give you a loan, but I want access to your phone. I want to put an app in your phone that will screen everything that it does. In fact, they probably don't even tell them that, right? It will go through, it will look at every phone call made. It will read every message made. It will go, that is that invasive, and that happens today. And it happens in a number of countries you're very familiar with, right? Because there's less regulation around that, less controls around that. Personally, I don't like that. Right? I think it's not informed consent, for a start. 2, it's really, really invasive. And I think the regulators have a role to play in making sure that those sorts of things do not happen, in my view. I think, obviously the person who's getting the money wants the money, they'll do anything to get the money, and so they say yes. They don't really think about what could happen in the future with their data, right? And I think some of these fintechs probably just will do anything to lend the money and make the profit. And then champion consumer-centric models. Yeah, I think we all do that. I think that's a given, right? We all know that our customers are consumers. And this is one of the messages I tell my guys in the bureaus. No matter who our customer is it a bank? Who runs that bank? Who's the CEO? It's a person, it's a consumer. They're not big industry machines. They're run by people. So we need to connect with the people as an industry at multiple levels. They need to understand what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. We need to work with our regulators. We need to work with our customers. We need to work with everybody. This is a partnership model, right? We can't get away from that. And that's it from me. Thanks, Neil.
No, I've got some payback for you. Mayor, do you want to come up? We can share over this side, gentlemen. Share that one. I think that's. Better try that one. I think that one's dead. So some interesting comments and views on identity, and I think it sets it up well for a discussion. What I want to take, as I said earlier, to the ICCR, because I think it's something that needs to be looked at. But any particular questions for these two gentlemen? It'd be a shame not to. Hard ones to Dennis, easy ones to Mayor.
Thank you.
I think we can do the opposite. Just quite. Might not like my answers, Neil.
A comment? Yes, by all means. Yeah. Comments are welcome. Statements. Long and not about me. Ingrid?
So after I listened to your presentation, I have to say I'm happy that I'm living in Europe and we have GDPR and the AI regulation, even if we are, let me say, see it very often as a burden because it hinders us to develop or to be more innovative in the sense of AI. But on the other side, I feel protected. I have to say. So I think there should be a balance in between, because these are the pure identity resolutions, so with video identification and so forth. And then I found very interesting your presentation with, let me say, other solutions. So bringing both together and also looking at the regulations, what we have in Europe as an example, and look at how can it balanced out in a way. It could be really a very good way in meeting what is needed for the identity verification, especially globally, because globally is a dream so far, but I agree we should have it, that you go to somewhere and, yeah. But balance it out, I think bringing all this together, we could combat the financial crime and identity theft, especially, and at the same time, improve the customer experience, because at the end, it started from having fun, having time, everything should be easy in exit and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to your point that, yes, thank God for GDPR. I think fraudsters will find a way around things, right? They always do. And I think this is going to be this tussle between fraudsters and the industry. We are both using AI/ML, right? As you all know. So it's an interesting space, and a space where innovation and disinnovation, if I may use the word, is happening at the same time at pace. To Dennis's point, every 3 months, you have this completely new thing you haven't even heard about, right? Or didn't imagine. And why even 3 months, right? Today you have the OpenAI new model in the morning, and then you have DeepSeek coming in the evening and saying, "Oh, really? Here is mine," right? So the pace of innovation in this whole industry is mind-boggling. And I think I spoke about the grammar of fraud, right? So for those of you who know about how ChatGPT works, how does ChatGPT predict the next word? There is an interesting corollary there. If we can bring that to the ID and fraud world, you can actually start predicting what I was calling the grammar of fraud, right? So why is this separate? What's going on here? I think we are going there, right? I think to Dennis's point, yes, we have to strike the right balance between regulators and innovation. That's always the challenge. I believe probably one way to do that is regulatory sandboxes, right? Where the unknowns, we experiment in the sandbox, regulators are comfortable with it. But yes, if that works and black box is the answer, then we release it, right? So I think that's the way to go, because I know we'll always have a responsibility as a regulated entity to balance innovation and regulation. So that's what I would say.
We've been round long enough now to know that if you lose your identity, it's difficult to rehabilitate. And the question I've got, and I'll talk about the ecosystem rather than the industry and the regulators, just the ecosystem. What role does the ecosystem have to support and assist citizens whose ID has been compromised in some way?
I think that's an absolutely great question. And I think as bureaus, we have that role as well. We are relying on the sanctity of IDs and who they are to do business and make money, then we have a role to make sure that those who have been compromised have a path, have an understanding and knowledge of how to fix things when they're broken. I absolutely see that as a role for credit bureaus, for regulators to work with credit bureaus on that. And I agree 100% that that's something we need to be doing.
Fully agree.
How does one actually kick that off, though?
Yeah, it's got to be driven. I think there is some of that already going on. Look, I can speak about some of my past businesses. So I know in Malaysia here, CETOS, I used to run CETOS here. There is a guideline, if you like, to what to do if your identity's been stolen, right? We also built in the direct-to-consumer proposition here in Malaysia the deep web access, so you know this, where that consumers can see if their information is for sale on the deep web, the dark web rather, not the deep, the dark web. And not only do we tell them that, yep, your information's for sale on the dark web, but we give them advice on what to do next, right? And that should be standard across any of these. Certainly in direct-to-consumer proposition that we're just building in Indonesia, it will do the same thing. It will give advice on what to do next if something has happened.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the only thing I'll add is we are definitely not there yet, Peter, to your point, right? But I think we are getting better versus where we used to be. And I spoke about the friction. If, heavens forbid, if somebody went through what you said, it used to take weeks, if not months, to get that rectified. Even today, in many scenarios, it does, right? But I think we are getting better. At least we have like a digital process now. There is artificial intelligence which is coming in to make it faster, more streamlined. We are definitely not exactly there. But I do hope that it is, we can kind of get to a point where it will become simpler, right, to achieve the future that you spoke about.
I think it's that public awareness.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a citizen of modest means, how do you actually get in touch with a credit bureau or a regulator and talk to a real person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, most of the time, it obviously comes through when a financial transaction occurs, so you get a lot of banks involved. And I think one of the questions.
That doesn't help the problem.
No, well, I think one of the questions is actually the banks joining up and sharing of data, because we haven't talked about bank sharing of data. It's the old-fashioned way, but in fact, it's still extremely relevant, especially for dealing with rectification. Yeah.
I think one last thing I might add is, Peter, as you all know, the frequency of data submission by banks to bureaus is increasing in many countries. I think that will also help in its own small way, right? Because the data is not as static as it used to be. Yeah, it's not going to be real time. It's going to take time. But at least in some shape or form, it helps because you have a more recent image of the data from the bank. I think that will facilitate or accelerate things. But yeah, long way to go.
Yeah, that helps the banked population. It's the underserved, underbanked population that's being missed out again. Yeah, and then the ones at real risk.
Yeah,
Okay, we've got some questions at the back there.
I have Leo. Did you want a question? And then I've got a couple at the back. Yeah, Mal, and then
Question for the both of you, I guess. To my understanding, and for what I know, the KYC is a requirement. It's an activity that helps the institution to protect its own financial, his own assets, his own finances, and it's something that helps the government to prevent the money laundering and terrorist financing. But I don't misrepresent myself, but I misrepresent what I intend to do. No? Can you expand a little bit on this sort of vertical, what has been going on in the industry in terms of preventing money laundering, terrorist financing? It's still part of the identification process, and it's the immediate downstream activity, I suppose.
Yeah, you're really getting into a whole new bucket of discussion there around AML and so on, right? And probably that's a different sector altogether that we need to come back to.
yeah,
So
no,
we
and
can be talking about that along.
I think
I'm not sure, sorry if I'm saying no, because you said in your presentation it's another check. So you have the identity, and in the identity check process, you include already the sanction list checks and stuff like this. So which means at the end, you move the identity check, you expand the classical identity check with a risked fraud check, which is starting from the beginning. It's just a question mark. That's what
It's
I
true,
understood.
but it links to what Dennis spoke about, which is that I guess multi-layered checks is the answer to what you're saying, right? So there are various types of KYC checks. It doesn't help that the regulations on KYC are also very different. Many of the industries and countries in early stages of their credit evolution have a lot of ID cards for the KYC check. That is the primary means of KYC, just looking at the ID card or taking a photograph. And Dennis spoke very well about how that is not anymore an option, given how sophisticated fraud is. So I think the answer is KYC is a separate subject, as Dennis correctly pointed out. I think we will get more sophisticated, but I believe part of the answer is multi-layered verification towards KYC.
Yeah, just to add to that and to your point, we don't just do eKYC. It's part of a journey, right? So the journey would be, we also talk to our customers about adding in AML detection and so on as part of that journey. And so it's going to be up to what the customer already has. And the banks will have their internal systems already for the money laundering. But if they don't, we offer that service as well, where we can go to the sanctions list and we can do all that sort of stuff as well.
Just a follow-up comment. I guess money laundering has changed a little bit from large transaction to a huge amounts of small transactions. No? So this kind of response works when you're doing a more sizable transaction and you want to layer the checks within a funnel where you go progressively deeper and deeper based on the type of risk indicators that you see. Which also include the type of operation that you're applying for. If you're doing a top-up for $20, you do a simple KYC and you consider the problem solved. But if you organize yourself to do 100 million $20 top-ups, now you're really funneling a lot of illicit funds. Is there a interest from the industry and something exciting happening to support both consumers and institutions to solve this social issue?
Again, I think this is an opportunity for AI to step in to identify that level of transaction over a short time, which is what you're talking about, right? Where it's been done by robots and bots are doing these sort of transactions in real time, short space of time, small amounts. AI can detect that now. Now, is there an appetite in the industry to do that? To be honest, I haven't seen it. Maybe it's something we can do together. You know, I don't know of any bureau that's doing that.
It's true. Yeah, I think device checks kind of are starting to address part of the problem. So as you all know, a lot of fraudsters do this in fraud rings. What you said, right? There'll be multiple transactions and they'll try to confuse the system with multiple checks from multiple devices. But if you tag all those devices as fraudulent, I think at some level you can start catching this. But again, I think there's a long way to go. It has to be a multi-layered approach, right from the point of the device hitting the system to what's happening in the journey after that, I think is where we need to get to. But there's a whole lot of work in this space for sure that the industry still needs to do.
Thank you. I've got a Vladimir, did you want a question? Back at the back, please.
Oh, that's my regulator. I got to be nice.
Vladimir. Thank you. Is it on?
Hello. Yeah, question for both. So you both talked about AI and identity. So as a regulator, what do you want? How can regulators, your other regulators, help out? Of course, GDPR was raised and that it makes consumers feel safe because of how stringent it is. So you may also comment on, do you think it's too strict? Do you want to loosen up a bit? Dennis also brought up that there is responsibility on private sector also to balance out commercial interests with other considerations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Look, let me grab that one first because he's my regulator. Yeah, Val, look, I have to, and being honest here, I think CIC in the Philippines is probably one of the easiest regulators in the world to deal with. They are very much around responding to the needs of the industry and the consumers. And so I don't think we've got any problems. I can't say the same in other countries. And without mentioning Indonesia, you know, our businesses in Indonesia are separated into three groups. We have the credit bureau, we have eKYC business, and we have alternative scoring business. Different licenses, different approach, and they have to be separate. So we don't get the synergies that run across all of that because of the way the regulator runs it, which to me is crazy, right? Whereas obviously in the Philippines, we can do it all together. We can have that end-to-end type approach. And I think, yeah, look, I think in terms of what a regulator can do, allow us to do what we can do. Give us the freedom to serve the needs of the people and our customers.
I think there's also a need for access to data.
Yeah, I was going to add that. So I think, again, I agree with Dennis that Philippines is very enabling regulation. In some countries, I know bureaus are not allowed at all to touch alternative data. So that is one ask I would have. I think that is very powerful in terms of what it can unlock, not just for identity and KYC, but for a lot of other use cases for those billion invisible people we spoke about, right? So that is one ask I would have of those countries where this is still not allowed. The second thing I would say is defining ID as a legitimate purpose, what's called in GDPR, a legitimate interest, where even without consent, sometimes you can do an ID check, right? Because by the time you take the consent, you don't want the fraudster to get away. This is all happening in real time, right? So there is something called, I'm not an expert here, but there's something called legitimate interest, I understand, in GDPR. So if ID can be very clearly included in that and cross-border exchange and pinging of IDs can be made legal, and absolutely there can be a law around it, I think that'll help a lot. Those are the two things I'll call out.
I mean, the one thing you need to, well, I can start about GDPR, I'll be here all day, but I think what you can do with, I mean, it's not just a legitimate interest, you know, as a lender, you just need to make sure you have that consent which covers identity. Far too often it's just covering credit risk. It's very simple just to put in identity risk as well, and that will do it. So that's one of the ways to do it. So I think it's a combined approach. Getting too many questions here, guys, which is great news. Everybody's woken up. Now, who did I have first? Yeah, Pooven, and then we'll go to Monica at the back, please. I think it's Monica, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis, Mayur. So maybe just some observations from my side, maybe some comments on some of the topics that were brought up. So one, in terms of awareness, I think, Peter, you had raised that question earlier. So the way this is done in Malaysia, and Dennis will be, of course, familiar with this, we are mandated by our regulators to perform awareness for consumers and commercial sectors. We need to show proof of what are the events that we have conducted, how many individuals have attended these events, what were the exact components of the conversations that we have had with them. This includes introducing tools that helps them identify whether their identity has been gone into the dark web and so on. It is part of our license renewal requirement. So that could be one angle to control, to make sure that awareness is driven into the market. Secondly, I think in terms of fraud and so on, just an observation, although it is a major problem, banks, telcos who are using these KYC, eKYC tools at the moment are profiting from the tool. Even though the loss ratios are higher than the traditional channels, money is still to be made. They're not going to stop using this tool. So there is still time for us to figure out ways to do this better. But my observation is banks, telcos, device lending and so on, device leasing, whatever it is, everyone wants to go down this path. So this challenge is always going to be there. We just need to get better. Absolutely. So it's going to be there. I think the comment that certain companies are going back to the traditional method, I think they're going to change their mind when they see just how much money their competitors are making from this type of channel. The third comment I had was on how do we control this data. So I think CTOS runs fraud bureaus in the region. One way that we do this is sharing data between different entities with each other. This includes identity data, so photographic information, any information that was keyed in during the application process and so on is shared between banks. For example, in Malaysia, they use the CTOS Bureau today. It is a centralized system that checks at the application level whether or not this data was seen elsewhere to cut off that application the moment you see similar or some sort of fraudulent, something just doesn't look right, we just stop that right there. And I think the missing component right now that we are trying to work towards is to include data from regulators as well. So if the NRD can open up data of individual data and so on, and that goes into our platform as well, that then adds another layer of verification capability that we currently do not have. So that consortium approach, I think, will need to become the way forward because there's not going to be any one entity that's going to have all the information on any particular individual. That would be my view.
Yeah, just to add one comment to that, I think the biggest challenge that banks particularly have around fraud is knowing what is fraud. Because often fraud is marked as credit risk loss, right? And so they don't always know what's fraud, therefore they don't always know what to share. So that in the fraud bureau, right? So I think it's education for them as well, around really being clear on what is fraud and what isn't fraud.
But I think it is a collective approach, you're right. It has to have all sectors involved, public, private, you know, and so I think it's good. I mean, it's good to hear what the regulator is asking you to do in Malaysia. My only comment, being somewhat cynical, is regulation has a minimum compliance. So I'm trying. For me, I'd like to go beyond that, but I'm getting a bit like Dennis as time goes. So
I don't think any bureau would have an issue with that as being a requirement.
No, I don't think it would, but I think it's just, I want to see people go beyond that, but that's my point. Monica.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself, sorry. Probably.
Oh, sorry, I'm Monica from Centrix. We're a credit bureau in New Zealand. I've got a slightly different question. So obviously there's a lot of fintech activity in this space, and we're starting to see an emergence of these global data aggregators that are really focusing on cross-border digital verification. What's your view on those entities? Because they're obviously wanting to ingest bureau data, but as a consequence, really commoditising that information. So I'm just curious what you think.
Full disclosure, AI Group has got two arms to it. One is the data business, which is what I run, the credit bureaus, ecosystem, all that sort of stuff is my side. The other side is fintech. So we have buy now, pay later business called Atomi, for example. Some of you maybe we're in the region, and in KP, in Indonesia and others. So I sort of know what's going on both sides, but we have this wall between. We don't share any information or whatever because we actually work with the competitors. But fintechs, there's been a lot of development in Philippines recently on fintechs. And how many, I think 50 odd, lost their license recently to operate because they weren't complying with the regulators. So I think the fintech space can be still a bit of a cowboyish thing. But there are also good fintechs out there. And so I think there is going to be this bedding down of identifying which are the real capable, reliable, honest fintechs versus those that are coming from other countries to just take advantage. And a lot of that space is not regulated yet. So I think we will see more regulation coming in. We'll see more aggressive approach from regulators. And I think, there's comments around things like collections activity for fintechs is very aggressive, very old school. People with bats walking around streets type of approach. And that's creating challenges. And so, I think it's evolving, the fintech space. You cannot deny it's here to stay. So as bureaus, we need to adapt, we need to include, and we need to use that data because they've got some fantastic data, right?
I think it's a good example of frenemies, just to add to what Dennis said. This is a very good example where we compete on the one side, we collaborate on the other, but for good purpose, right? And I think I spoke about ecosystems, and I think the world is moving to that, right? There will be competition and collaboration at the same point for a particular use case. And I think we will evolve as bureaus, and fintechs will also evolve as the environment evolves, right? But I think this is one of the great examples of frenemies I can think about, right? Because it's real and it's happening, and absolutely there's no question that we are competing on the one hand, but we are very much collaborating with all these guys.
And I think with fintechs, I think my advice to regulators in the room is to get them into sandboxes or other similar environments very soon where they develop some compliant solutions from the start. What happens is they develop solutions which are non-compliant, they get found out, and that's the problem. So I know sandboxes are fairly new, but I think we'll see a lot more prevalence of that type of activity to make sure because I know regulators are very keen for fintechs to continue to grow. But they really do need to be in there right at the start so that their solutions are compliant and there's longevity in them.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, let's not be too hard on fintechs. They do fill a space that's needed.
Yeah.
They do have a service that is required.
Any more questions? Because I'm keeping you from a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. So, any more? Well, if not, that's been a very active engagement. So thank you for that this afternoon. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to these two gentlemen for their time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dennis.